You're listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio.
Infinite diversity.
Live long and prosper, and welcome to Infinite Diversity, a Star Trek Universe podcast here on the BQN Podcast Collective. I'm your host for today, Chrissie, and joining me is my co-host, Thad. Thad, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, I guess. I got trapped on this planet because my underlings thought I wasn't doing a good job, but, you know, I'll make the best of it.
You have underlings? Why don't I have underlings? I need people to do things for me.
Well, not anymore.
Well, I guess that's true, yeah. Maybe it wasn't a good idea. All right. Well, also joining us today is Alex Perry of TrekCore and Weekly Trek. Alex, how are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
Not bad. Just getting over a little bit of insert Star Trek type cold virus here.
Tucalian flu.
Couldn't think of one. There you go.
What was the thing that Barclay had?
Well, that
caused Barclay's prenomorphosis syndrome?
That
he got the T-cell injection for. It was some sort of flu or cold.
It was some sort of flu. Well, I definitely don't have that.
Well, you're not getting a T-cell injection, so you're probably safe.
Well, that's true. And it is right before Halloween.
You start going Neanderthal on us, though. I mean, we'll know what happened. I guess at that point, I'm doing the editing this week.
Yes. Oh, I'd make a joke here about being Italian and having to deal with body hair. Yeah. So, before we jump into our topic for the day, on that note, we'd like to take a moment to thank our Patreon patrons who make this show possible, particularly our associate producer, Carl Wonders. Listeners, you can hear your name listed as one of our associate producers for a monthly subscription of just $10 at patreon.com/BQN. And with a monthly Patreon subscription of just $5 or more, you can join our meetings of the Hive Mind, which are usually on the second Saturday of each month. Watch your Patreon messages for details. Do we have any news this week?
One thing I will say, if you filled out the form for Paramount to get your replacement Picard disc, if you did it as soon as the form came out at least, you should have or will soon be receiving your disc, because I got mine in the mail a couple days ago. I never got any response from Paramount when I submitted the form. It even said that you would get an email response, and you never did. But the disc just showed up in my mail with no note or anything, just in an envelope.
There you go. There was your response.
Yes. I was slightly concerned because there's no visual difference on the disc compared to the one that was in the... I'm like, is this actually... Did they just send me the same disc again? But I did check, and it does have the updated scene.
Well, good.
Oops.
Well, I guess they followed through even if you didn't hear about it.
Yeah.
So
I mean, sending
part.
it without a response is better than responding and never sending it, I suppose.
That it is.
Was there any other news? Alex, do you know of any news?
No, I just recorded an episode last night, but it was all the New York Comic Con news, which I'm sure you've already covered, so...
Yeah.
No, it was a quiet week.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think our New York Comic Con coverage was basically there wasn't much announced at New York Comic Con, but yes.
Yeah.
You got a vibes check on the health of the Star Trek franchise? That was about as good as it got.
We can partially blame Strike.
You can buy a really expensive jacket or sweatshirt from Kid Cudi. But we talked about that last week.
I learned at New York Comic Con it's Kid Cudi.
Oh shit! Well, now I feel bad.
So did I, but yes. Well,
because I think I was taking my pronunciation from you.
Yes, almost certainly, and so that's why I'm doing the mea culpa. He is Scott Mescudi, but he goes by Kid Cudi.
Okay.
Well, that's he's being confusing.
Yeah, really.
So
I mean, he has been a known figure since like 2009, so like it's a little bit it's a little bit on us, but yeah,
not among Star Trek nerds, but yes.
Well, I think in the episode I was like, I don't know how to pronounce this, and I should have looked it up beforehand, and I'm just gonna pick one and go with it, and I picked the wrong one.
Like, I look at that, and I don't, like, I mean, names can be pronounced in many different ways, but, like, looking at that, I would not think that you would use that sort of, that sound with only, with one D. Like, a soft O, you would normally expect it to be two Ds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or U, not O. What am I saying?
I was about to say, and then I was like, I haven't seen it in print in a while, so maybe it is an O. I don't know.
But yeah.
Well,
but again, names can be pronounced in many different ways. So, Kid Cudi, I apologize for pronouncing your name wrong, and obviously you can spell it and pronounce it however you want to.
Yes, and if you're actually listening to us, we'd be happy to talk to you about the very expensive jacket and everything else.
And if you want to send us review samples, that'd be awesome too. I mean,
that would be fun.
I'll absolutely take a review sample.
It's the George Carlin joke. You can spell your name. What is it? Spell your name Smith and pronounce it Janowski. And that is an old Carlin joke. Okay. Right.
I'm pretty sure you know every George Carlin joke.
I would not be surprised if I did.
How often insert thing here on this podcast reminds you of a George Carlin joke, usually one I've never heard of.
It's probably because I was raised on the stuff from the 70s.
Fair.
And then moved into the stuff that was current with the time I was living. Anyway,
my biggest, my strongest memories of George Carlin are from Shining Time Station, honestly.
That doesn't surprise me in the slightest. At least from your childhood.
Right.
I understand that. Yeah. Right. So we have an episode this week.
We had quite an episode this week.
Yeah. Okay. Well, before I jump into my thoughts on it, we'll start with Alex. What's your initial thoughts, first impressions?
I loved this week's episode. There's, sometimes when you watch an episode of Star Trek and you get, a quarter or a third of the way in and you have that moment of realization where you're like, oh, I'm watching a really good episode of Star Trek right now. And that, just sort of sticks with you through the rest of the episode. That was this episode for me. The sort of last two acts, I just had a big grin on my face the whole time because I was just like, oh yeah, I'm really this is really working for me. And it's great. Season 4 has been great. I've enjoyed the episodes very much. There's really just one or two episodes that I would consider to be average on the bad, average, good, very good, excellent scale. But we hadn't really had an episode that had quite hit that sort of stratospheric heights of episodes from previous seasons Crisis Point, No Small Parts, Wage Dooge, First Contact, Crisis Point 2, Paradoxus. And now I think to that list of episodes we can add The Inner Fight as being among the show's best. Partially, I think it will be a little bit determined by whether episode 10 is just as good as episode 9, since it's very clearly part 1 of a 2-part episode. But having said that, there's just a lot of really, really wonderful, wonderful stuff in this episode. And yeah, it's immediately my favorite episode of season 4. The very strong recency bias in my mind says to me that I want to call it my favorite episode of Lower Decks, but it's certainly amongst that, wherever it lands a year or two from now, it's certainly going to be in the top 10 episodes of the whole show.
Yeah, I think it hasn't quite eclipsed Wedge Douche for me, but it is definitely an amazing episode of Lower Decks. I loved it. It's very Star Trek. Just so much about it. And not just the fact that it references a lot of Star Trek. And I will say, speaking of references, I have been waiting for 4 years now for Lower Decks to reference Lower Decks. And it has now.
Yeah.
And you have to imagine that ever since Mike McMahon came up with the title for this show, he had at least some bit of that moment already fleshed out.
Yeah, I love this episode as well. It had all the great Trek elements of, we have a little bit of a science mystery, and we have a little bit of a space thing going on, and we have a dealing with the inner fight, as it were, to use the title, which I think is an awesome title.
I love it.
I mean, it's perfect. We've got a good one of those speeches, where they got the little bit of the music in the background of the show, so that you know that you're supposed to feel really, inspired. And I mean, it was all Trek. It's beautiful, beautiful.
The one thing that I feel was a little weird, I kind of wish that the B plot of the senior officers looking for Nick Locarno had not been specifically about looking for Nick Locarno. Like, I think that would have made the reveal at the end cooler if we hadn't already had it set up. Yeah.
I was surprised to see him, though.
I guess
I didn't make that, I didn't make that jump. So it was still like, oh, wow, cool. But you're right, if we hadn't known that he was going to show up at all. Even because she just calls him Nick, so you would have had to have that moment of, that's Nick Locarno. So, yeah.
I love that Paramount's been ultra secretive about this episode, right? Like, they didn't release the name of it on Monday, which they typically release the name of the episode alongside the, promo images. They didn't...
I'm not sure why they kept the name a secret.
No, so...
I'm not.
So I love that... So they're ultra secretive about this episode, and I love that the thing that they were ultra secretive about was Nick Locarno returning to Star Trek, right? Like, that's like them doing a sequel to the First Duty. Like, that's in some ways, to me, that's a very meta commentary on the things that Star Trek fans really care about and are motivated and moved by, right? Like, that honestly, more secrecy than there was about any episode of Strangely World Season 3. More secrecy than there was, frankly, about any episode of Picard that's Strangely World Season 2. More secrecy, honestly, than anything about Picard Season 3. The thing that Paramount's no, we must protect this secret at all costs, is not the return of the Enterprise D in Star Trek Picard Season 3.
That ship had metaphorically sailed.
Yes, it is... Robert Duncan McNeil reprising his original Star Trek role from The First Duty, one Nick Locarno.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny because I saw Robbie McNeil at Shore Leave this past summer, which was like the last Star Trek convention before the strike. So it was when actors could still talk about stuff. And yeah, that man had secrets that he did not reveal.
Well, he did that before, too.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, we knew he was going to show up in We'll Always Have Tom Paris because it was in the name, but,
Yeah, and I think he was in the trailer for the season as well.
He was, yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah. But anyway, it's all right. No, I love that. I hadn't thought about, of all of the reveals, you kind of go, yeah, okay, with what we've seen for Picard Season 3, we'll probably see the Enterprise at some point. But
yeah. And Patrick Stewart
expected
said
Nick
it at
Locarno.
Comic-Con, so,
Well, put aside that.
And Paramount's like, no, he's confused. He didn't mean that. Yeah, okay, sure.
Oh, damn. I just thought of a funny tweet I could have put up with no one expects Nick Locarno with the guys from Monty Python. I might have to do that now still. Okay.
Make sure to include the hashtag just in case someone hasn't seen it.
Yeah, okay. A week later. Yeah, sure.
I still do the hashtag even a week later just to... And amazingly, I will still get people bitching about it even if I do use the hashtag. So...
Yeah. I use the you want to use the hashtag because that way people see it too if they
there's that too.
You.
But like also if there is a show that is currently running that you have not seen the latest episode and you don't want to be spoiled and you are not muting that episode that show's hashtag on Twitter, then it is on you.
With the exception, I discovered if you have something set up to send you notifications when somebody tweets, it overrides that.
Oh, okay.
So there's that. But
so whoever you're
anyway.
stalking online, make sure that they're not talking about.
I was gonna say, I don't care enough about people to have notifications set.
Now, here's the funny thing. Like, I have a group of people I have notifications set, and I barely look at Twitter otherwise.
So I know
reverse.
you have notifications set for me because you're always liking my tweets.
It's how I have cored down Twitter to people that are not crazy. It's
Well,
really
it's a smart
useful.
way of doing things.
Fair.
I'll take that. All right. Well, let's talk about the episode here. We start off with the Tremble Lizards of Perseoff 9. So these are
They
sound like a
pop out.
velociraptor. Yeah, they make your eyes pop out. They sound like a velociraptor. They spit Dilophosaurus acid spit. And they look like one of the little mouser robots from the Ninja Turtles cartoon in the 90s. I love it. It's fantastic. I was calling it Space Isla Nublar, or Ila Nublar.
Well, yeah, that works.
Well, they're like in the wild though, so it's more like Space Elasorna.
Yeah, you're right. Okay. I'll give you that one. But, that was funny. Right, so we have to fix the stuff on the station, and they can really only respect and appreciate these things if they have the shields up, which I guess I understand. And Mariner takes the opportunity to almost get herself killed again. Mm-hmm. How have you guys been feeling about this ongoing storyline? Okay, let's set aside what we learn in a few minutes here, but as we've gone through the season, how have you guys been feeling about this?
It's been kind of annoying, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
Like I feel kind of how Quimp did in Parth Ferenghi's Heart Place. That like, Mariner, you gotta stop this.
Yeah.
I have struggled with it a little bit. I mean, it certainly has been one of those areas where, right, like, Star Trek Lower Decks has been very good for an adult animated comedy at not maintaining the status quo in its entirety, but the format is very much one that, like, drives that, right? Like The Simpsons, 37 years later, everybody's still the same age and doing the same thing that they were, in season 1, even though Homer should be in his 70s at this point, or, however old he's supposed to be. But, and Bart should be in his 30s or 40s. So I had sort of been chafing a little bit against it from that perspective of, oh, this is just sort of like that animated comedy trope thing where it's like, this character is this way and the character is never gonna not be that because this is the way the character is and this is how they behave, and like, are we really gonna see that again? But then I saw an interview with Mike McMahon right after the writer's strike ended. He was sort of back doing promotion for the show, and he directly addressed that criticism and said that the thing about like growth and character growth is that it's not linear in many cases, right? Like, individual growth is not something where it's like you encounter a challenge, you emotionally grow from it, and then that challenge never bothers you again, right? Like, oftentimes these are intrinsic parts of our personality that, even if we are working to try and overcome, are things that are still going to be a problem for us. Having said that, though, right, like, this certainly feels like it should be the end of that particular arc, and I know we'll talk about, like, why a bit later, but the fact of its resolution in this way makes whatever frustrations I had felt with it from previous episodes all worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah, it actually feels like it meant to go somewhere now.
Yeah, now that we have the
which
payoff,
I'm glad for.
It works. To directly reference Star Trek. Because we never do that on this show.
No.
It reminds me a lot of Tom Paris in season 2 of Voyager. Because there was this there was this subplot throughout season 2 of Voyager where Tom Paris was getting increasingly more belligerent and not wanting to follow orders, and at one point he punches Chakotay.
Chakotay,
so, and yes,
I was about to say.
And like, obviously in that case, it's the payoff was completely different because it turned out that Paris was not actually acting out, and it was all a ploy for him to believably leave the ship and make it look to Seska as if he had actually left. But the fact that until you knew where they were going with it, it was just annoying.
Yeah.
It's the same sort of thing.
You're like, where's the minor character growth that we've seen in the last
right
15
exactly
episodes,
like the first season you see some growth of Paris it seems like he's actually really wanting to move on and grow, and then season 2 has this, and like Harry Kim even says that basically straight to him, and he's like, well, maybe you never knew me at all, and it's like and like that whole thing, it's like it annoys you until you know where they're going with the story, and I would put that out as a criticism of a lot of criticism of shows in general and media consumption, is a lot of people really criticize certain things that characters do without waiting to see where the story goes.
Yeah. When you're dealing with it week to week, I can see where that would be an issue, but then does the person, once it's found out, do you have that like, oh, okay, so here's all the things I said that now we have a reason for that I didn't need to say, and they never do.
Depending on who the person is, a lot of times they do.
Well, I shouldn't say never, but yeah.
Speaking of the importance of emotional growth.
Oh, right. In talking about Tom Paris there, and funny since we hear from Nick Locarno here, but I've been playing catch up on Delta Flyers because when it started however many years ago, I had intended to go week to week with them, as so many people I'm sure intended to and didn't end up doing. I hope I'm not the only one.
You're not.
But I know I'm not. There's no way.
I have a couple seasons to listen to.
Okay, good. That makes me feel better. I want to get caught up before they start on DS9 because I want to take that week.
I didn't even know they were going to do DS9. That's amazing.
Yes, they.
You didn't?
No.
Armin Shimmerman and Terry Farrell are making it a foursome. I'm interested.
Okay,
in
if it's
Terry and
4
Armin's
of them, that's interesting. Because that really changes the dynamic of it, but it does make more sense than just Garrett and Robbie talking about DS9.
Yeah. Right, so I just this week watched their discussion of 30 Days, and about how Robbie Duncan McNeil was talking about how he really wanted to see rebellious Tom again, but he wanted it to be for a reason. And he was bugging the writers for that, and then finally they got 30 Days.
That's such a good episode.
Yeah, so great.
It is so good. It's so good, yeah. But anyway, yeah, so we finally have some information about this mystery ship, and we find out that they say it had only been targeting non-Federation ships. I guess I assumed the Binar were part of the Federation, but I guess they're not. The other ones, yeah, but...
If the Binars had been part of the Federation, they probably wouldn't have needed to steal Star... I mean, they ended up not having to steal the Enterprise anyway, but you may have said no. But they probably wouldn't have worried about them maybe saying no if they had been part of the Federation.
But if that was 20 years ago, so I guess I kind of extrapolated. True. But I shouldn't do that. So anyway, so now they're targeting former Starfleet, and I love top of that list, Beverly Crusher.
So
that connects nicely.
If they weren't targeting Federation ships, why was Betazoid Intelligence doing secret operations to try to figure out who was doing it?
Well, I mean, they were targeting some allied. I mean, if the Binars aren't part of the Federation, they're allied. The Klingons are loosely allied.
Yeah, okay.
And we don't know what connections Beta's... I mean, I doubt Betazed has its own treaty with Romulus, but, they're still...
Because Betazed is part of the Federation, is what I was getting at.
It is, absolutely, yes, but... Well... they're telepathic. I mean, I guess do you really have to go further than that? Now that I'm thinking on it,
But we never never hear about them going after. We never hear which not former Starfleet officers they have gone after, and we never see that happen. I think that would have been cool if we had, like, I don't know, seen, Thomas Riker on a ship getting attacked or something.
Yeah.
Well, it shows that Thomas Riker is not in a Cardassian prison and B still alive, which does
Yes.
Which is interesting.
Very interesting.
We had not established.
My very very much my own personal headcanon that has no evidence in actual Star Trek has been for years that Thomas Riker and Sito Jaxa ended up in the same Cardassian prison and broke out together. I think probably that didn't happen. I mean, I'm sure.
I mean, I've
always thought probably that didn't happen.
If it did, we'll probably know next week.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, my sense of it is that, like, Nick Locarno is not the mastermind of whatever this thing is, and it's obvious from the clues given to you in a fight around, the people on the surface mostly being the senior officers of the ship, and them saying, our lower ranks were fed lies and revolted against us, that there's some kind of, like, uprising of the lower decks thing happening here. It wouldn't shock me if it's like Nick Locarno, Thomas Riker, right? Like, and that Frakes is in next week's, and
that would be amazing.
Yeah, that there is.
I do think Sito Jaxa is probably actually dead, because it would
probably,
if she were not, it would negate the whole thing with Mariner this week.
It would undercut, yes, the emotional resonance of this, sort of episode. But yeah, like, I wouldn't put it past him to like have, like, a Thomas Riker character show up next week, who is, maybe it's a few different characters who are, like, cast off, Starfleet officers who have a chip on their shoulder about stuff, but we'll see. That's I mean, that in some ways that's the great thing. Like, they have very much, like, kept it all under wraps, so I have no idea what to expect from the finale.
Hey, maybe we'll see Ro Laren, and it'll tell us the story of her coming back to Starfleet.
I think, given how much they had to beg Michelle Forbes to do Star Trek Picard Season 3, I'm going to guess she probably didn't say yes to doing Lower Decks.
Yeah, probably not.
Well, it's easier to lend a voice than a whole body, so you never know. But that would be an interesting connection. We have, we're starting to get genuine canon stuff here, so yeah.
Oh man, what if Michael Eddington didn't actually die? He's part of this.
Just start bringing back everybody from the dead. It's just
yeah.
All these people. Yeah, right. So we've got Crusher. I don't think we're gonna run into her.
No, that was just to reference Picard. Is all that was.
It was, but you can also take it as, at some point she did end up back on Earth because Jack got his, English accent at the schools in London. So, but he would be, I looked up the date on this. We're still in 2381, which surprised me because, I thought we'd be about 2382, 83 by now, but we're not moving forward in the same way. Because didn't it start in 2380, Lower Decks?
Yeah, but the first 3 seasons were 2380.
Oh, that's right. I was thinking season. Okay, never mind. Anyway, so
despite that flashback New Year's party that apparently was a mistake.
They'll fix it. Yeah, that's fine. They'll fix it on the Blu-ray. Then they'll send out discs to people. And
Nothing.
Like you were saying. No, they won't. Right. So 7 of 9 they refer to as former Starfleet. Okay.
Yeah, that was interesting because the line from Picard was that she hadn't been allowed to join Starfleet.
Yeah, but I mean, it's close enough, right? She spent 4 years on Voyager.
Yeah. Right, and then Thomas Riker, as you said, not dead or in a Cardassian prison, and then Nick Locarno. Now, I don't know how many people have just headcanon that Nick Locarno and Tom Paris actually were the same person.
Well, they're all wrong.
Well, obviously now.
No, but even before they were wrong.
Okay, Okay, why could that not have been the case? Tell me.
I don't want to invalidate your headcanon, but I'm going to.
Well, it's been invalidated, so it's irrelevant now.
Here's the thing. Yes, obviously there's some inspiration in Nick Locarno for Tom Paris, but Jerry Taylor, who created Tom Paris, is on record as saying that she deliberately wanted to make him a different character and give him a slightly different backstory to show that he could be redeemed. Because when Paris is telling his story in Caretaker to Kim, he mentions that he would have gotten away with it if not for his own guilty conscience when he went back and admitted what happened.
That's true.
And that is not something Locarno did.
The ghosts of those 3 dead officers came to me in the middle of the night and taught me the true meaning of Christmas.
True meaning of Christmas. Yes.
Oh.
And it was 3 instead of 1.
And it definitely wasn't 4 ghosts, even though there actually are 4, but that's a whole other thing. Yeah, I had forgotten about that, the conscience thing. I always liked the idea that he was there under an assumed name because he didn't want people to associate him with his father.
If you watch The Muppets Christmas Carol, it's 5 ghosts, because there's 2 Marleys.
Marley and Marley.
Marley!
Woo!
Woo!
Oh, I think I've seen that in like 30 years, but sure, okay.
Oh, I watch that every Christmas.
It's the best version of the Christmas Carol. Yes, I also watch it every Christmas.
No. The best version of A Christmas Carol is Bill Murray's Scrooged.
I'm gonna admit, I watched that last year because I had never seen it, and you told me I had to.
Yeah, me
Chrissy.
too. I had exactly the same experience. I watched it for the first time last year as well.
And you didn't
Thought
like
it was okay.
Yeah, but we both come at it from the perspective of, like, when you watch it in your late 30s, that's not, you know,
Right.
It doesn't have the same
probably...
formative, right, like, imprint onto your psyche than if you watched it in 1980X, whenever it came out.
Right,
Yeah.
and Muppets Christmas Carol, I watched that in the theater when that came out back in 93, 92?
Yeah.
92?
I mean, that's why my favorite
92 or
Christmas
93
movie is The Santa Claus, right? Like,
Oh,
is
me
that
too.
objectively the best Christmas movie? Absolutely not. But is it the one that I watch every Christmas Eve? Yes, it fucking is.
But I would argue that Muppets Christmas Carol is truly a masterpiece.
Oh, it is. Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyway.
And it's just, sorry, one more aside about Muppets Christmas Carol. It is, what makes that movie is that Michael Caine plays it straight the entire time. He at no point acknowledges that he's acting with Muppets.
Yes.
He just plays it completely straight, and it's perfect.
Wonderful.
You have to do that. Mm-hmm. You have to. Yeah. All right. Well, sorry I steered you off with Scrooge there, but
That's okay.
Maybe it's the same reason that I have all of the 70s George Carlin memorized. I don't know.
But yeah, anyway, that's what my point is, that Jerry Taylor intended him to be a different character from the beginning.
Right, and she's got the final word on it, and I was not aware of that, and I had forgotten about the one line from the episode. Voyager is not the one that I know best.
Sure.
So, yeah.
We can't all be perfect.
Right. So, no, this is true. So Freeman asks that they get Mariner away from this situation because she's been doing this weird death wish thing, and I'm sure she is aware of the fact that they at least knew each other at the academy. I have to assume that. And so she does not want Mariner involved in this at all, which is how we end up with our crew at Cherbourg 5. But I want to deal with New Axton first because Cherbourg 5 is really where the meat of the story is. Mm-hmm. If that works for you guys.
Yes.
So, New Axton, twice as lawless as the old one. I love that. Without the charm. Where was the old one? I want to know these stories. It's a beautiful example of Starfleet assumes anywhere that doesn't observe their own rules is just, this lawless backwater place that can't be handled, even though obviously they know enough to not let ships sit in their thermosphere. I mean, come on. But that also connects well later with what we're going to talk about, what Starfleet and the Federation possibly really are. So, how did you feel about this plot line of, Freeman goes down there, and she's like, I know exactly what I'm doing because I passed the class. I aced hoodlums and racketeering seminar at the academy.
I loved that line. This reminded me a bit of the TNG episode Gambit.
Yes.
With the Starfleet officers just showing up in the bar in their uniform, asking questions. Yeah, and like the door and Freeman's just like, no, we're just a group of rogues or whatever line she used, and the guy's like, no, you're in Starfleet uniform. So like I found that funny. I didn't realize that they were, playing 3D chess with this. I thought it was funny in and of itself, but it becomes even more funny when you realize that they were outsmarting them.
I loved that, and it was a direct... Like, they used a previous episode of this season to bait and switch you on it, right? Because in the Cradle of Exelon, Freeman beams down and is like, oh, I minored in, ancient alien supercomputers at the Academy. I've got this. I'm going to take this from here, and makes a complete hash of it. And you're like, oh, well, we're just watching the same thing happen all over again, right? Like, she's overconfident, thinks her, Academy elective is enough to get through this situation, and we are watching the same kind of subplot play out from in the Cradle of Exelon all over again now, in this situation. And so that was my total headspace up until the reveal, when I was like, oh, right, like, that was really clever. It was not just clever within the context of the episode itself, it was also clever within the context of the season. I mean, I didn't love the fact that Freeman was a moron in the Cradle of Exelon. That's why it's my least favorite episode of the season, because anytime you do turn Star Trek characters, particularly Starfleet officers, into idiots for the purpose of humor, I always feel like actually there was probably a smarter, more Star Trek-y way you could have done that. But given that episode exists and I can't go back and change it, right? Like, using that sort of conceit and relying on that as a way of then, like, flipping the switch on you and showing, actually, this is how it should be done, right? Like, you can still get all of the humor out of the characters being stupid while have them not be stupid. That's the key piece of it. I thought was incredibly well done, and I was very, like, on board with the whole thing.
Yeah. I was completely surprised, because I was expecting, like, how is she actually expecting to get this information standing out there looking, like a cop? So, yeah, that was good.
Well, they could try the other bar that had the bouncer that was the same species as Narj from I Have No Bones Yet I Must Flee,
and had a sandwich board with crayon drawing. Yeah. I like the idea that Harry Mudd just eventually went and opened up a bar somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Good.
And half-price jippers.
Half-price jippers.
Nice.
For tripeds.
Yes. Not on a beach, but it's a reference, and I love it. I didn't catch it the first time I watched it, and it was because I didn't have the closed caption on, and then, later I was like, oh!
Yeah, but
jippers.
I just like it was
back.
2 3-legged aliens that he's like, we've got half-price jippers for tripeds today.
Yeah, why not?
One of them, of course, was an Edosian, which is the species that Eric's from the animated series was in. Yep.
And the guy from the farm, whose name escapes me at the moment. But
yeah, I don't remember the guy's name either.
I don't think he had a name.
Yeah. Oh, okay, good. Then I didn't forget something. Is that better or worse than half-price drinks for a particular gender on a day? I don't know. It's kind of speciesist. What if you're a triped species and you've had a leg amputated for some reason? I'm thinking too much
a question I'm sure that they considered in the writer's room.
Oh, people, this is what Dayquil does to you. It's fun.
It's triped's night. Oh, what a night.
Yeah. And then, okay, so finally they get in. I like how they get a half hour added on their wait. And we meet the information broker, who is apparently the species on which Balok's puppet was based.
Apparently. He's not a puppet. He has lots of internal organs.
Yes.
I laughed so hard
at
this joke. I lost it. It's the third lost it joke for me this season, because it just perfectly plays on your expectations as a Star Trek fan in the know, right? Who's watched them all, or at least has watched the Corbomite maneuver or any episode of the original series' end credits, to you're like, oh, of course it's a puppet, right? It's not just talking like a puppet, it does not just look like a puppet, it is a puppet, because it was a puppet in the Corbomite maneuver. And then, to, again, pull the bait and switch and have it be not a puppet, that really, that did it for me very, very much.
Yes. Yeah. And that, when they went back to that in the books, didn't it turn out that those were actually real people that Balok's people had fought against?
I don't remember either.
Yeah. I'm sure they weren't little puppet-looking people if they were that. Anyway, so they almost kill the information broker, not puppet, and then he sells the info to Billups, as we find out, who was the guy with the drawn-on mask, which I thought was pretty good.
I like the comment about how sweaty a full face mask is.
Yeah. Unless you're a Breen, then it's just needed.
Well, it depends on which species of Breen you are. Some of them, it's not actually needed. True. You just do it so that you're all treated equally under the eyes of other Breen.
Okay, that's true. I would call that societally needed.
Of course, that is all beta canon that may or may not still apply, because it was written in a universe that is not the same universe as this Star Trek.
I keep forgetting that. Well, I mean, I feel like there's species continuity there. The species are not going to be that different. The Breen pre-existed the split, so...
Yeah, but they never established that the Breen were more than one species.
No, they didn't.
It's on TV.
Right. We digress, as we do. So they get the information, they go to where Locarno's supposed to be, they find the blueprints or the pictures, but they don't find him. Did you guys think it was really dumb that Shax was just walking through there going, "We're Starfleet, come talk to us"?
Them starting to say, and the fact that Freeman was about to say, "We're here to take you under protective custody," before Rutherford points out the schematics. Is like, if he's hidden this far, what makes you think he's going to show up when you say, "We're here to take you into custody"? I mean,
not worked out well for him before.
Yeah.
No. So I mean, that's a fun part of it, but it's definitely B plot. And because the real plot is this Mariner thing, and that takes us to Sherbal 4, where we are going to deal with this weather buoy connected to the weather satellite thing. And there's Klingons sitting there watching it.
Yeah, because it turns out this planet has become the dumping ground for all the commanding officers of those ships that we've seen being abducted.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wish we had seen the Cardassians get abducted.
Oh, I totally forgot about the fact that we didn't see that.
Like, I think we saw all the others, but the Cardassians we did not see.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Maybe that'll be relevant.
Maybe. Is this an allegiance situation? Are the Cardassians actually in on it?
Yeah, possibly.
Maybe. The Klingons that are on that... I didn't get to go through this as many times as I intended. Was that the lower decks Klingons that were holding that ship then?
Yeah, the lower decks Klingons had taken over control of the ship and were now guarding the planet. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, so that's... So, I wonder if we'll see the other lower deckers from the other ships on there. Probably not.
Yeah, because the Romulans, Orions, etc. should all be around somewhere.
Yes,
but they may be off doing nefarious things.
Yes.
They're lurking over there.
Yes. All right, so they get the Klingons attack the shuttle. They transmount down to Sherbal 4, and Mariner announces that she wants to be the apex predator because they hear some fighting going on.
One of my favorite lines from this was when Mariner's like, "Bring it," and T'Lyn says, "Perhaps we should find shelter before anything is brought."
T'Lyn is perfect in this episode. Oh, and that reminds me, because I didn't jot it down, but there's some connection with her and the battle with the pack lads.
Well, yeah, she was on the ship.
Because Mariner mentions it.
She was on the Vulcan ship.
Oh, that's right. Okay. God, I need to go back and rewatch this whole series. I'll blame the cold. Right, so they hear the fighting. When they follow it, it's a Romulan and a Ferengi who are pretending to fight. So they're trying to bring Ma'a to them, and then the Cardassian comes in, and Mariner is again trying to get herself killed.
And T'Lyn incapacitates the Cardassian, and again, a great line from T'Lyn. Mariner's like, I could have taken him, and T'Lyn's like, I have no doubt that you would have tried.
Yes. Yeah, she's good. They are writing her like Tuvok with the just understated. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So they figure out where the monitoring station is. They're going to go to send a distress call. The suggestion is made that they go the long way around because it's safer, and that leads to them having to confront Mariner and tell her that the whole reason they were there was to try to keep her from killing herself, basically, with this, what was supposed to be an easy mission. And then she sneaks away. And meets Ma'a. And starts fighting with him, but gets interrupted by glass rain. I like the glass rain. What'd you guys think?
Yeah, that was great.
That was good. We have purple Klingon blood again.
I
think
love
we've had
the
that
purple
before on
Klingon
Lower
blood.
Decks, but I will bring it up every time.
It always disappointed me that it was never purple on TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise, etc.
Yeah. After Undiscovered Country happened, it should have been the yogurt blood from there forward. But which I think is interesting with the reasoning, because you can have the red, potentially R-rated blood on the TV show, but not in the movie. So that's fine. Anyway,
I don't know that they could have had that much blood on the TV show in the 90s either.
Well, yeah, probably floating through the air like that, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So anyway, so Ma'a. So we get to this scene that is like the culmination of all this stuff that has been happening with Mariner the whole season, and he opens up an opportunity for her to explain. This blew me away. I was not expecting this. Did you guys think that this went this deep with Mariner?
No. I didn't realize Mariner was that old.
Well, the signs are all there,
the
right?
thing, too.
I mean, that's the really interesting thing is, you do know that she's that old. You just don't realize that she's that old because she, in season 1, talked about having served on Deep Space Nine at the same time as Worf. You know that she is much older than, therefore has to be much older than like Boimler and Tendi and Rutherford. And so, in some ways, all of the stuff about her backstory, if we'd sat and thought about it for 20 seconds, probably would have put A to B to C together, but you just never do, right? Because you're just going with it and you're just sort of along for the ride. And so, that connection to the idea of her having been at the Academy at the same time as Wesley Crusher and Nick Locarno and Cito Jaxa and the events of the First Duty is a really interesting one. And then, of course, right, we knew she was on Deep Space Nine around the time that Worf was there, which means she served on Deep Space Nine at some point between Deep Space Nine Season 4 and the end of Deep Space Nine Season 7, because that's when Worf was there. And so, of course, she was part of Starfleet during the Dominion War, and of course that was something that, was obviously going to have an impact on her in a way that it wasn't going to on Boimler or Rutherford or Tendi, because their careers post-date that event having happened. So it's really wonderful. I'm very curious to know the extent to which this was something that Mike McMahon knew at the start of the show, or was this something that he sort of developed for this episode, or when did he decide, that this was going to happen and that there was going to be a direct connection between episode Lower Decks and show Lower Decks. But what a perfect way of doing it that completely fits with what we know about the character and what we know about the shows and what we know about the character's backstory already. None of it feels manufactured or forced or weird. Mm-hmm. It is very good, and it really does sort of explain, right, prior to this episode, Marrow was just a sort of rebel without a cause, right? Doing this stuff because she was a thrill seeker or knew better or was chafing against authority. And now you have this really clear explanation for that behavior that is very much tied into, you previously sort of asked the question, well, why are you still here then, right? And you got that story play out a little bit in season 3, where she was like, well, maybe I shouldn't be here, and then decided that she did want to. And, yes, returning to this story topic was definitely a frustrating one, but it was a frustrating one in the sense of not necessarily knowing that there was going to be an end to it, right? And that there was a point to it. And now that there is both what seems like an end to it and a point to it, it is a really rich character arc over the course of 4 seasons that has, a defined beginning, middle, and end. And you can't be a Star Trek fan and not, a Star Trek fan who has watched TNG and not watched The Inner Fight and not be moved by that particular scene.
Was it, I don't know if it was last week or a couple weeks ago, Thad, we were talking about if we knew how much of the Dominion War Mariner had seen, because we weren't sure.
Yeah.
And this clears that up. But I looked it up because I don't have these dates in my head like I should as a good Trek fan. But First Duty happened in 2368. So if she's 20 when that happens, let's assume, because they were all, junior, sophomore, somewhere in that.
Right.
So let's say she's 20. So that means she's 39 or 40.
And Tony Newsom's 40 years old.
It does make sense.
Yeah. Which I would is interesting because that puts, I would say, Captain Freeman at the youngest in her early 60s, which is maybe not super relevant there, but we do think about the ages of how old Picard was supposed to be when he was taking the Enterprise and all that. Yeah, so that fits perfectly. And of course, Dominion War ended.
Picard was 10 years older than Patrick Stewart, wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, he was supposed to be in his 50s. Yeah. So just, it's that whole thing of age is 70 is the new 50 by the time you get to the 2370s.
If you live in an era where Leonard McCoy lives to see the launch of the Enterprise D. Right. I mean,
137 years of age. Yeah, so all of that follows beautifully, but I'm glad we finally have confirmation of that. Because like you said, I figured she was a lot older than we thought. Yeah. And we saw... I'm trying to think. Was there a flashback or a time that we saw Freeman in the Monster Maroons? Or around Monster Maroons?
Not that I know.
No, but I remember there was a time we were talking about how old she was. About how old Freeman was. And who had she had... forget it, because I can't remember when it was.
Probably. Well, no, we don't actually... We don't know for sure, but I imagine she's probably old enough to have been in the Monster Birds. If you consider that...
At least at the Academy.
Yeah, because if you consider that Jack Crusher were a Monster Maroon, and that would have been after... Well, that would have been when Wesley was, born, or just after, really. That then, if you consider Mariner would be about the same age as Wesley, then yes, you would assume that Freeman would have been in Starfleet in the Monster Maroons. But I don't think we ever saw that, no.
No, but there's a reference to... Never mind. All I remember is it was sometime we had one of the authors on, and I made, this was back when it was Justin and Brandon, and
Sure.
I made an ass of myself because I spent 20 minutes trying to figure out how old Captain Freeman was and forgot to look up the stuff that the author had written. So yeah. Woo. Anyway, right. Okay.
Was that Michael Jan Freeman? Because he wrote a lot of books in the Stargazer period.
No.
Oh, okay. Because that's what I was trying to think related.
Oh, and it's even worse because I can't remember. It was the guy who wrote the first book that had President Baco in it.
Oh, Keith DeCanada?
Yeah. And then I had not looked that up, and then he started talking about that, and I was like, I forgot that you wrote that. And I went, oh my God. I'm an idiot. And I have made an ass of myself. But that's okay. I live up to it now, so it's, it's all right. Where were we? Mariner's Story. This brings us to that big Trek question about what Starfleet is, which I want to get into once we just finish up the... I feel like I'm like more... I've been gearing to talk about what this means more than the episode itself, so forgive me if I've skipped past stuff and stop me, But she loves Starfleet. She's broken by Ceto's death. She has this survivor's guilt. And I love what she says about it, and I love how Ma'a brings it back together for her. Starfleet's supposed to be about puzzling together the mysteries of life, not fighting wars. And he tells her, she died so that you could puzzle out the mysteries of life and vanquish your enemies and go study your, what are they, plants? Sometimes plants. Yeah. And then she hugs him. That was beautiful. Klingons don't hug. What are you doing? So they go and they find where the crews of the other ships are. Ferengi apparently also eat fruit. Or maybe they're just looking for the bugs in the fruit.
I mean, I don't know that we know that Ferengi only eat bugs.
That's true.
They just
I'm
prefer
just
bugs.
being dumb.
Certainly if fruit is the only food around.
Well, you can't make profit if you're dead, right? So
Right.
that makes sense. We see the Mistress of the Winter Constellations again show up.
Mm-hmm. Which is great when we now know what that means.
Yes. That helps. And technically she's not anymore, but I guess she's the Mistress Emeritus. I don't know. They're still
Once
weird.
a mistress, always a mistress.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounded weirder than I meant, but I meant as
Yeah.
a mistress of the Winter Constellations and not, Yeah, anyway.
No comment.
Once you hold a position of power, then yeah, right. Also, not necessarily what that meant. So she works through all of her issues, maybe not works through all of them is the wrong way to put it, but
She's immediately cured.
I mean, it is a half an hour Trek
I mean,
episode, so it's going
yeah,
to be
it's TV.
slight to be continued.
I mean, honestly, that's very Star Trek, too. Especially very 90s Star Trek, which is what Lower Decks is referencing most. I mean, it feels like it's... once someone actually works through it, they are cured. Like, I mean, obviously, I was getting some vibes from B'Elanna Torres in Voyager.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're coming back to Voyager again. With the risk taking that she was doing after learning about what happened to the Maquis.
Yeah, that's what I got too.
Yeah, and I mean that was mostly cleared up in the episode where she finally addresses it. So yeah, it's the same sort of thing.
That's interesting. This didn't occur to me until you just said here we are at Voyager again. But of course we have TNG with the counselor on the bridge. But so there's a recognition of the need for mental health care, but also an idea that it can be cured just as quickly by, waving a light over it in the way that the medical issues can be. Then we go to DS9, which is much more nuanced with everything.
Mm-hmm.
But then it takes until we're back on Voyager until we have those kind of issues really hitting Starfleet officers.
Well,
That was just, of course, long after Roddenberry's gone, in terms of...
I mean, we
involvement
have some
and-
of that on DS9 too, but yes.
But, well, I carve out DS9 from that because it's got the different mood.
Gotcha, okay.
Know? You expect there to be those issues on DS9 because you have this different setting and all of the things that make DS9 different and wonderful. And then Voyager is like, okay, we're back to the TNG style, but we're not in that way. And it just popped in my head as you were saying that. It's more influence of Roddenberry and all of that, and the lack thereof. But I love how Ma'at, and I'm going to keep calling him Ma'at, because Ma'at is a thing in Egyptian society, an ancient Egyptian society, about how you're supposed to respect the gods, and it's spelled almost the same. Anyway, the way he talks about how she's fighting with herself. Mm-hmm. I love that. I think that is an aspect of we've gotten little touches of that with Klingons over the years. Again, bringing back to DS9. But it reminded me of those wonderful memes, too, about Klingons recognizing the need for mental health care and fighting one's own demons.
Mm-hmm. Well, that will take us back to DS9.
Exactly.
When By Inferno's Light, mm-hmm. when Garrick has to face his claustrophobia to get them out of that prison,
right.
And Martok and Worf talk about how there's no greater enemy than one's own fears,
mm-hmm.
and it takes a brave man to face them and all that. So yeah,
I love
even
that.
Klingons care about mental health.
Mm-hmm. Great. So they're going to have everybody work together. Mariner says it's harder to have everybody work together, which I like that. She gets transported away. The bird of prey comes in and destroys the station because they get the distress call, and then the kidnap crews take over the bird of prey, which is apparently easy enough to do with your bare hands by ripping pieces of the hull off, but we won't talk about spaceworthiness with that, I guess. It seemed a little too easy to me, but whatever.
Well, yeah, so my thought on that, I was wondering, how did they manage to do that, but mm-hmm. my thought is that perhaps Ma'a has security codes that still work to, like, open a hatch or something.
Oh, okay. I guess that could have been a hatch.
But we don't see that. We just sort of see them jumping inside the ship, but...
Well, no, we see them crank up... Somebody pulls up a piece of hull.
Okay.
I can't remember who it is, though. But, could have been bending a hatch. And then Mariner's not there. I love how Ma'a asserts control over the ship. Mm-hmm. It's very Klingon.
Covered in Klingon blood.
Basically, by tearing that guy apart.
All over his face.
Basically eating him, yeah.
He bit him, at least some. But of course, that's what you have to do to take over a Klingon ship, otherwise they try to kill him. And then Mariner is with Locarno, and they're going to go cause some trouble. Very interesting.
I like when Mariner wakes up and is like, what minimalist hell is this?
Yes! Very 90s Trek. Like, here's some white walls and mm-hmm. a window and a bed. That's it. Yeah. And then we get the to be continued, which is great.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah?
Yeah. So, philosophy. This struck me as very interesting. Is Starfleet military? The perpetual question. That supposedly Simon Pegg answered.
Despite the fact that they always say it's not, it is, because it is... What I would say is Starfleet is not only military, and they don't have there is no dedicated military in the Federation, so Starfleet fills that role when necessary. That does not make Starfleet completely military, but they do function in a military way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It struck me in watching this, and a little bit was because we see some of this on Discovery with the Klingon War too, mm-hmm. but Roddenberry's a product of World War II, in that military, that American military. And I don't feel like anybody ever asked that question with the stuff that he was directly involved in. That does not get to be a question until we get into, mid TNG maybe at best. Definitely DS9, the question is asked.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that has to do with generational shift of the people who are working on it. Is it the difference between what we term greatest generation, the World War II generation, versus Gen X versus millennials versus it'd be boomers somewhat on TNG. People who have dealt with war versus people who generally haven't on a generational level. And of course, if we think about human exploration, if we take, the example is always the New World, right? That's never not military. It's not exploration for exploration's sake. It's exploration for conquest's sake, or exploration for financial conquest's sake, and getting spices and whatever. So these are the big thoughts that I had. This is making up for the lack of big thoughts for the rest of the season. This is why I kept stumbling over this, trying to find, the message all season.
Well, I think that to me, Star Trek has been fairly consistently clear about the military question, which is that it's not a binary yes/no, right? Like, is Starfleet a military? Yes or no is not the right question. To me, it's Starfleet is a military, to sort of use Thad's term, right, when it needs to be. And that is, in some ways, the sort of utopian vision of it, right? Which is, you exist in a world where you don't need one all of the time, right? Like, you have this organization that serves a military purpose, but it's not its primary function. It's a secondary or tertiary function. It exists for another reason, another mission that it's undertaking, right? In this case, the mission of exploration, but is one that, like, you can't not have a organization that serves the function of a military and then be in a position where you need something like that. And so in some ways, Starfleet is the, like, idealized evolution of what a military should be, which is, if you think about it from the perspective of a lot of the, like, research and writing that there's been on organizational culture, right? Like, organizational culture is very important, and organizational mission is one where once you create an organization that has a mission, it never wants to stop doing that thing, right? Like, and that means that puts us in a difficult position when it comes to having a permanent all the time military, because a permanent all the time military's organizational mission is to behave in a military fashion and engage in a military way. And, like, there are plenty of examples in American history where you could probably point to examples where you're like, maybe there was another way out of this situation other than military action. No. But because we have this large institution that has this organizational culture that's very much about, like, doing this thing, right? Like, then you do that thing. And so I think this sort of 24th century version of this, 23rd century, 22nd century version of this, right, like, is, no, you don't have a permanent military. You do not have one organization whose organizational culture is entirely set up for military endeavors, military exercise, and engaging in problems with military solutions. That you have an organization whose organizational culture is one around exploration, around scientific discovery, around, expanding the boundaries of human knowledge, but who has a secondary organizational mission, which is around, if you're going to shoot at us, we'll shoot back at you, and we'll win, right? And I think that's the way I have always thought about Starfleet within the context of that military question, is that come the 24th century, we have decided that we do not need a permanent all of the time military, but it's not like you can just live in a communist utopia where you don't need a function that could be a military, you still need that. And so Starfleet is sort of the perfect answer to that question, right? You have an organization that can be a military, but is not in and of itself a military organization. But that obviously creates, like that's not a perfect fit, right? Because you sign up to the organization for its primary mission, exploration, and you accept that part of your responsibility will be that you have to do that military thing, right? And that's sort of like, well, this is why it's a fictional organization and not a real organization is, I think a lot of the way that militaries have been set up by major countries around the world. It's like, no, the only way this works is if you're just about that thing and you just do that thing and everybody who's part of it understands they're just part of that thing. And so episodes like this are kind of like playing out that tension between the two different roles that don't exist in modern day militaries but do exist in Starfleet, which is Starfleet is primarily designed to do something different. But I love that, right? Because you are taking a conceit of this fictional universe and interrogating it and saying, does it hold muster, at least within the context of the fictional universe? And, Mariner's sort of dilemma here is one that would play out in that situation, which is, I signed up for organizational mission number 1, but thanks to the Dominion and the Borg and the Klingons and the Romulans, I have found myself doing more of organizational mission number 2, and that's not why I came here, but I signed up to do it all, and so this is, how things ended up being. And I think there is, not just within a military context, I think a sort of a broader point connected to like Mariner's story, which is she's very much someone who at an earlier, more optimistic, see if this resonates with either of you, at an earlier, more optimistic point in their life had been told that, they could go out and do anything they wanted to and be anyone they wanted to, and that, there was a certain set of expectations they should have about what would happen for them in their 20s and their 30s, and then life intervened, and other things happened that made them need to change their hopes and dreams for the future and contend with the world as it is rather than the world that they were told to expect. And I found that deeply affecting, right? In terms of, I've never fought in a war and knock on wood, that won't be something that I ever have to experience. But I certainly do have some experience of having been at an earlier point in my life being told this is what you should expect your life to be, and then the consequences of the world and economic calamities and global pandemics and climate change and war and the impacts that has on everyday life, right? Like have, meant that my life has been something different than what I thought it was going to be when I was at the equivalent of Starfleet Academy. And so, I think there's a very profound sort of message connected to this episode. That's one of the reasons why I think it's such a great episode.
I could not say that better.
No, I was about to make a joke that the Dominion War is the 2008 economic collapse.
Yeah, or the COVID-19 pandemic, or,
yeah,
or the Iraq War, or, you name it, or 9/11, right? Like,
yeah.
it's all of that stuff.
And that actually does bring it back to that, is it a generational attitude shift that I was thinking about this morning? Because you have that assumption that the military part is needed by the World War II generation. And those of us who grew up with that not, let's say, so obvious, like to think of it maybe as not having to be necessary as part of it. Whether or not it is a different issue, and that's more of a dream than a reality. I can see with that.
I would push back on that slightly, just from the perspective of,
Please.
I don't know that the original series Starfleet is explicitly understood as being a military, right? Like, if anything, the Gene Roddenberry, Gene Coon version of Starfleet is one in which you have some of the trappings of a military organization, but they very explicitly didn't walk down the path of like really kitting it out in a military way, right? Just look at the uniforms, right? Like the uniforms are not military uniforms. They're very specifically not military uniforms. They look totally different. They have a totally different vibe to them. Nick Meyer's perception of Starfleet is where you begin injecting all of that militarism into it, right? Like the movie era of adding all of the medals and the badges and the commendations on the sleeve and
all things that Roddenberry did.
Yeah, all of that, like, you know, sort of military, like, procedures and the bosun's whistle and, you know, and the constant announcements over the intercom, right? Like, just like you would expect on a aircraft carrier. That was all Nick Meyer's injection into Star Trek 2 through 6. That really did militarize Starfleet. Just from he was coming at it more from the perspective of, well, this, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? And Starfleet walks like a military and talks like a military, so it's a military, and we're just going to lean in and do all of that stuff. I think by the time you get back to the Next Generation, they peeled some of that stuff back again, right? And you're right, and you're back to colourful uniforms and, you know, all of that stuff. But there, it is that sort of fundamental kind of tension, which anybody who's sort of accessing the works kind of ends up asking themselves about, like, well, what is this thing? Is it a military? Is it not a military? Right? Like, you use a military rank structure, you have protocol, a uniform code of justice. Sounds like a military to me, and it's like, yeah, but, you know, it's just sort of an organizational structure that adopts parts of a military way of thinking to go and do something else with, yes, the need to do military stuff along the way. So I actually think that Gene Roddenberry and Gene Coon's perception of Starfleet was not just your, like, core military thing. Really, the only sort of Star Trek creative that I can point to who has had a very strong, like, Starfleet is a military and that's the way that we should treat it is Nick Meyer. And you know, obviously his involvement in the franchise has sort of dialed up that conversation quite a bit, but I don't know that it's generational, because Nick Meyer, right, is baby boomer, right?
I was just looking that up. Yeah. In fact, almost definitionally so. He was born in 45.
Yeah, right. Yeah, 45. So you don't get more baby boomer than being born in December of 1945. So, right, like...
That's like literally the first round of people that came home from Europe before the surrender.
So, so I don't know that there's generational conflict here, but I do think that you know, to the extent that you want to put a generational lens on Star Trek and its evolution, I think the difficulty of it all is what is generationally different, right? Like, to the extent that and it's really weird to say that someone who fought in World War II and experienced all of that has a more optimistic view of what the future could be than someone like me who just ordered DoorDash and, you know, like, has all of these sort of creature comforts and ability to do all of this stuff, right? Like, I'm obviously incredibly privileged, but I do think that the sort of cultural sense of optimism about what was possible was very different. I mean, was it all that different though? Because, you know, late 60s and, you know, the US was on the verge of societal collapse and like, you know, all of that, right? Like, you certainly it was a very difficult time, 1966 to 1969. But I do think there is a unique sense of pessimism that exists today about what the future holds for modern society than there was potentially, and I would encourage anybody who has a different position on this to push back on me, because I'd love to hear it, than there was in the 60s and 70s. And to the extent that anything is different, that is potentially it for me.
Those are great points. It was easier to be optimistic in the post-war era. And I would, I mean, there's that optimism of we're going to get to the moon just because we say we're going to get to the moon.
Right.
I mean, they had to use information gleaned through Nazis killing people to do it, but we did get to the moon. And maybe the issue, because you do bring up about the societal difficulties, the people who looked like Gene Roddenberry and functioned like Gene Roddenberry and had a life like Gene Roddenberry, i.e. white men of a certain class, it was all easier. And that's not to say that there wasn't an awareness of what was going on outside of that. But if we're looking at what Trek is and who produced it and what it presented, then it is very much that level of privilege, even though those people did see war, even though they did deal with those things.
Well, they saw bottom, right? Like, it's very easy to see all of the potential up when you've literally seen the bottom, right? The worst that it can possibly be. Like, you can understand why once you've gotten past that, for those people who experience that, which is not like, you know, you're sort of drawing that distinction between people who are having a very tough time in the late 60s were not, at that point, the people who had fought in World War II, well, the white men who had fought in World War II, right? Like, and who were in positions of privilege in Hollywood and running TV shows and writing for TV shows and doing, you know, these quite glamorous jobs. It probably was very easy just to see yourself as being on the upward slope. And you know, in some ways that's the sort of genesis of Star Trek and that like Roddenberryan utopian future, is this idea that there is this relentless march to better, and you are going to get there, right? And yep, you're going to go through additional dips and falls in order to get there. I mean, World War III was not, you know, like something that was like a well fleshed out concept in Roddenberry's mind, but certainly, right, like was there are still, like, World War II is not the sort of point at which it only gets better. World War III is the point at which it only gets better. But that, you know, there is this sort of general sense of a progression towards a future in which things are better than today, versus the dystopian version of science fiction, which is, you know, things are only on a downward slope and only going to get worse from here. And I think it is more difficult today to realistically hold within yourself that utopian vision of the future as being a likely possibility, as opposed to the other side of things. And that feels like, you know, where, like, looking at the long game of it, yes, we are at the best moment to live ever because we have all of this stuff and it's wonderful, and like we have access to, you know, all of these creature comforts and privileges. But like, I don't know, you just sort of have this sense of like, oh, we have this stuff. Are our kids going to have this stuff in 30 or 40 years? Maybe not, right? Like, you know,
that generation never had that.
And I, you know, previous generations, I think, have been very much wired to believe whatever challenges we have faced, our children will have it better. And I don't know that today's generation is necessarily all on the same page about that being the case, in a way that, of course, there were people at all points in history have said, oh, things are only going to get worse from here. But I think that sense is much more, has permeated through the culture in a way that, you know, it previously had not done so.
There's a little bit more reality behind that, I feel like. But
there's more evidence for it, right?
Bias as well. Evidence, yeah, that's a better word for it. I don't know. I think we may have just put together a paper on this. That's where I go with these things, of course. But yeah, I mean, this is just, it's such an interesting thing to look at it from how it's perceived. And we went further than I had intended with, or we went further than I expected to go with this, which I love. This is good. Yeah. What's the most dystopian thing you can think of that came out of like 50s and 60s? Putting aside, I guess, let's put aside stuff like Godzilla, because that's coming out of Japan, which definitely had the dystopian. I mean, like what, that episode, The Twilight Zone, where everybody dies and the guy's glasses are broken?
There are
In
a
terms
lot
of, like,
dystopian
popular
stuff in
culture?
Twilight Zone, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's all those, like, giant bug movies in the 50s, but you never get the impression that they're going to take over the Earth.
Planet of the Apes.
Oh, yeah, it doesn't get more dystopian than that.
And that's like 68, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's late 60s, yeah. Yeah, maybe, I Am Legend.
Oh, the book,
That's,
yeah.
Yeah, that's current. Yeah, the book, that's concurrent with Trek. I feel like there was a lot more utopian versus dystopian in that era, and this falls into that well.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to paint with an overly broad brush about the way that people felt about
absolutely,
things.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Oh, sure.
I don't want to imply by my previous comments that everybody sort of felt or behaved a certain way, you know, because obviously there were people who were having very tough time of it, right? And, like, you know, people who were returning from the Vietnam War and they had just witnessed, you know, bottom. But I think generally, you know, if you sort of think about the cultural zeitgeist of the era, it is one of things will only get better, right? I mean, even all the way up through the, you know, late 90s, early 2000s, that sort of, you know, things will only get better mentality, right? Like was pretty pervasive around everything. And obviously, you know, 25 years later, things have changed a little bit, I think, in terms of our perception of that. And that has a real impact on, you know, like cultural products and what people are watching and consuming and the way they're thinking about things. And we could all use a little more Star Trek in our life, because it does say, you know, yes, even though things are potentially on a downward spiral, there's still, you know, that does not preclude the possibility of an upward spiral either now or whenever you hit the sort of low point from the downward spiral. But yeah, like, I think, you know, there and that's I think that's the difference between Mariner and Boimler, right? Like, Mariner is the person who experienced Vietnam or World War II and like and wants to believe in something better that comes after. And Boimler and Boimler particularly, you know, Rutherford and Tendi both have their own personal experiences. They're obviously not connected to the culture, but, like, you know, sort of shape their thinking. But Boimler, you know, is a product of not having had to have had this experience and, you know, just sort of seeing Starfleet as being that thing that is just the primary organizational mission, because he's never had to, you know, sort of do the compromise morals thing and participate in those military exercises. And so those two characters are very interesting in some ways when you do sort of realize the reality of, oh yeah, right, like they are the two main characters of the show, but actually Mariner is quite a bit older than Boimler is. I mean, even if you just go off the actor's age, right? Jack Quaid's 31 and Tawny Newsom's 40, and so, you know, there's about a decade's difference between those two characters, and about and that decade really matters, right? For Star Trek in terms of, you know, what those two characters' experiences were, what their life perspectives are, and how their own previous like life experiences inform the direction they're going in right now. And so it's really wonderful that we, you know, had a bit of an exploration of that for Mariner and the way that she is different from these other characters.
Yeah. I wasn't commenting on your generalization. I was trying to, because you were talking about what the zeitgeist.
I was commenting on my
context,
generalization because I didn't want people to listen and think that I was painting with too broad of a brush.
I'd be remiss in not bringing up George Romero's Night of the Living Dead, but that's also 1968, so that brings up... And things seem okay at the end of that for those who didn't get chewed on. Anyway. Yeah.
Planet of the... Okay, no, things don't seem okay at the end. I mean, ish.
They are for the apes.
Yeah, for the apes, they're fine.
Yeah. I mean, they've created a society just because it's not ours. Mm-hmm. Although it's very much like ours.
And I'm sure that society will continue to thrive, and there was never a second movie in which they all blow themselves up.
Yep. All right, well, I was going to get into Is the Federation Imperial? But I think we've really kind of handled that elsewhere or otherwise. Because there is that aspect, too, of is exploration conquest or is exploration exploration?
And that is an excellent question.
Yeah.
I would not put the Federation and the imperialism in the sense of, like, I don't know, like the British Empire of the 19th century or anything like that, but...
No.
Because you don't see them colonizing and subjugating inhabited worlds.
No.
But...
Culturally, though, maybe.
It depends how much joining the Federation is something that species do because they see Federation membership as a route to bettering themselves, or they see it as there being other economic or cultural advantages to doing so, right? Like, if it's the kind of thing you join because you are getting something for because it brings no value other than, like, you want to be part of this, you know, sort of collective effort, and you feel like you have just as much of a voice within that effort as anyone else does, then it's not imperialism. If you're doing it because... you know, the Federation's like, well, if you join us, there are all these benefits to doing so, and therefore it's in your best interest to do it, and, you know, you join, and there is a hierarchical structure where there's some of the races of the Federation sit in a more privileged position than some of the others, then you certainly could make an argument around, you know, cultural imperialism of, you know, people join because not necessarily they are coerced to join, but because the Federation has created an incentive package that makes it very difficult for people to say no to joining. Right. You know, like, and I think that a lot of people say they are like, oh, I really want a Federation politics show. And I'm like, I actually don't want one of those. And one of the reasons why I don't want that is because it would be incredibly difficult to do it well in the way that politics should be in the 24th century off of what we've been told the Federation is, rather than just using a bunch of 21st century politics to, like, and putting, like, a Federation patina over it. There's no television show that ever gets made that examines Federation politics in the way that it really should. I mean, even you were talking about Keith DeCandido's book, Articles of the Federation, earlier, right? Like, well, that's the West Wing with a Star Trek skin over it, right? Like, yeah.
And that's what people
right,
want
and he's bringing a 90s
show,
and 2000s politics perspective to it, and it's like, I actually think in order to depict the Federation in a really authentic way, it requires new thinking about what politics would look like 300 years from now, knowing that, you know, the way we've been told this entity functions is very different from the way that political entities today function, and the choices that they're faced with and the compromises that they make. And it's like, I don't know how you could do a Star Trek West Wing and not have it, you end up falling into the very easy trap of, oh, actually, this is cultural imperialism, and it is, you know, sort of like spreading the good word of the enlightened Westerners to all of the, like, galactic, you know, backwards people who need our learnings and our help in order to do this. I just there are no creative minds that I would say I trust to do justice to that in the way that it should be done. Because I do think that, you know, like, I think this is Starfleet a military is the easy question. I think is the Federation a form of imperialism is actually a much harder question to sort of pick your way through.
Yeah. Long time listeners will remember when we talked about the Harry Mudd short trek, Escape Artist. I ended up turning that into a long discussion about whether or not the Federation is imperial. Much to Justin and Brandon's like, what? We didn't expect to get anything serious out of this. So I think I've just done that here too, but that's okay. Yeah. Listeners, tell us what you think.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, I am interested. This is something to dig into. Yeah. And I don't think there's an answer.
Nope.
There's not.
But maybe it's a question they will explore further in the season finale.
Ooh, yes. There we go. Bring it back. Speaking of the season finale, any predictions for next week?
I gave you mine, Thomas Riker.
I like Thomas Riker.
I like Thomas Riker, too. Yeah. I don't think we'll see Cito. I think you're right.
No, I think Sita's dead.
That she needs to be dead. I don't think we'll see Wesley because I feel like that's a little bit of a Deus Ex Machina that would not actually work here.
I mean, I hadn't even considered Wesley until just now.
Mm-hmm.
But now I kind of want, like, an actual Deus Ex Machina. Like, Wesley shows up, be like, Nick, what are you doing? And Nick, like, changes his mind.
Well, and theoretically,
that would be
if
kind of
Mariner was friends with Sito Jaxa and Sito Jaxa was friends with Wesley Crusher, then by the, like 6 degrees of...
I mean, she clearly knows
Crusher,
Nick,
so
she must have known Wesley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now I want to know why she wasn't part of Nova Squadron. That's a whole other story we could tell. Other than it was written.
Maybe she was like a year behind or something.
Yeah, probably something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be kind of fun if we ran into. Let's see. Nurse Ogawa was one of the lower deckers, and then there was the random guy who's Canadian. That sounds right.
Yeah,
Sam Lavelle.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Torek.
Right. Yeah.
Who is a wholly distinct and separate person from
Wholly
Vorik.
distinct.
Well, they are obviously identical twins. I mean, that one's an easy one.
Sure.
Vulcans can have twins. Yeah, it'd be fun to see one of them, come in and get involved.
Torek and Vorik.
Lower decks and lower... Oh, that would be great. And so easily done in animation.
Get all of Jerry Taylor's distinct and yet the same Star Trek characters.
Yeah. Well, at least that one...
That was her son, though,
wasn't
it?
Yes.
The actor?
Alexander,
right, I was about to say. That's why there's the explanation there. All right, well, we've been all over the place on this one. Anything else we want to talk about?
Can't wait for next week.
I enjoyed when Boimler was sleeping and his sleep talking. Teach me how to tap dance Beverly Crusher. That was great.
Yes, that was perfect. And the pockets.
The pockets, which is definitely a reference to the fact that the outfits did not have pockets. Famously, which
is not very military.
The first time they put pockets in Starfleet uniforms was in an Enterprise. Jonathan Frakes tells the story about how there was always like a competition among the actors to see who would do what with their hands in scenes because they couldn't put them in their pockets. So like one person would cross their arms and then nobody else could. So someone always tried to cross their arms first, and one person would put their hands on their hips, and Yeah.
Tim Russ had that figured out with the thing with his hands sitting in the, which I can't really indicate.
So yes, I liked the pockets thing. Captain, did you know we had pockets?
Yep. All right. Well, Alex, thanks so much for joining us for this today.
Thank you.
Getting in depth in the discussion. I really appreciate that. Where can listeners find you online? And what's current and upcoming work would you like to plug there?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Alexander T. Perry. Most of my work's over at trekcore.com, including my weekly Star Trek news podcast, Weekly Trek.
And Thad, where can people find you when you're not digging your full face mask outfit and apparently cloaked vessel that you had hidden in the storage bay out to help collect information for Starfleet?
Well, a cloaked vessel by definition is hidden. Best place to find me is on Twitter at Tyrannicus. That's Tyranicus. I am also on Mastodon and Blue Sky with the same handle. You can also hear me on the podcast I do with my friend Carl called License to Spiel. That's license spelled with a C like the British do it, and we talk about TV shows and movies that we've watched. Chrissie, where can people find you when you're not ripping Klingons apart with your bare hands and drinking their blood?
Wow, that's very vampiric for... Actually, this is going to drop on Halloween, so that's perfect.
Excellent.
All right, well, in addition here in Infinite Diversity, you can find me on History with the Szilagys. That's short history podcast I do with my fellow historian partner, Jason. As regards to that, Jay did a talk at Delta College here, where we both work, about the background, the more recent background to what's going on in the Middle East right now, and I just put that up on YouTube, and it's also available in our podcast feed. If the 2 hour and 45 minutes from the beginning of time one was a bit daunting to you, this one's only an hour and 15, and it starts in the 1900s, so that helps. Early 1900s, so that's there. We'll be back to our more fun stuff next week. I'm also happy to chat about our shows on the BQN Collective on Facebook, and I am on Twitter and Blue Sky at the Goddess Livia, where you can see my opinions about Star Trek history and leftist politics.
Don't forget all our other great shows on BQN, and here's Amy Nelson to tell you all about them.
What shows are on BQN, you ask? Well, here's a rundown of some podcasts you might be interested in. All Good Things, a Star Trek Universe podcast covering all of Trek, hosted by Amy, Mark, Christos, and Kelvin. Bargain Bin Gamer, a YouTube show hosted by Davey, a self-proclaimed gamer who specializes in reviewing and showcasing affordable video games. If you're lost in the Delta Quadrant, check out The Captain's Couch, a Star Trek Voyager podcast hosted by Jeremiah sitting on Janeway's Ready Room couch. Cinema Z, a film discussion and review podcast showcasing films you probably missed but should definitely check out, hosted by Mark, Matt, and Laz. Beam Aboard the Galaxy Class, a Star Trek Next Generation podcast covering all of TNG, hosted by Amy, Joe, Rhea, and Kevin. History with the Szilagys, a snippet of historical events from around the world, hosted by Chrissie and Jason. For the newest Trek coverage, check out Infinite Diversity, hosted by Chrissie and Thad. Test your Trek knowledge with Treksperts Quiz, a Star Trek quiz show hosted and written by Davey. Union Federation, covering all things Star Trek and the Orville, which we all know is really a Star Trek show, hosted by Kyle, Kevin, Amy, and Haley. Spill the Tea with What's the Tea, Bev? A Trek current events and fan interview show hosted by Christos. And for our Patreon members, we have The Hive Mind, BQN's monthly roundtable discussion with hosts and listeners. It's Green, a cornucopia of topics hosted by Mark. And Amy's Math Moments, a quick look at math moments in Star Trek, hosted by Amy. We know you have a choice of podcasts to choose from, and we thank you for listening to BQN. Assimilate the audio.
And thank you so much for tuning in to Infinite Diversity. Thank you to Zach Tripp for the wonderful theme music and Mark White for the awesome show art. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast player, and don't forget to rate and review us there as well.
If you want to reach out, you can find the network on Twitter at BQN Podcasts, or our show specifically at IDIC Podcast. You can also talk about any and all of the BQN podcasts in our Facebook group, the BQN Collective. When you next hear from us, we'll be talking about the Season 4 finale of Lower Decks. Until then, peace and long life.